In quiet Maple Grove, appearances meant everything, but beneath manicured lawns festered dangerous lies. Fake community enforcement officers, emboldened by an HOA leader's prejudice, believed a black teenager riding home was out of place and vulnerable. Exhausted from practice and heading back alone, he seemed like an easy mark. What they couldn't imagine was the strength waiting behind him at home. A father forged through decades of federal training and hardened by years of confronting real threats. When intimidation turned to physical assault, their counterfeit authority collided with authentic power, sparking a reckoning the neighborhood would never forget. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the suburban streets as Malik pedaled his bike toward home. His muscles ached from basketball practice, but it was a good kind of pain. The rhythm of his favorite hip-hop track pulsed through his earbuds, matching the steady rotation of his bike wheels on the smooth asphalt. Sweat trickled down his neck despite the cooling evening air. His practice jersey clung to his back underneath his backpack, and he looked forward to a cold shower and his mom's promised lasagna for dinner. The familiar houses of his neighborhood slid past. The Martinez place with its perfectly trimmed hedges, old Mr. Johnson's weather-worn garden gnomes, the Thompsons' kids' chalk drawings decorating their driveway. Malik rounded the corner onto his street, already tasting dinner, when he spotted them. Two men stood like a wall across the sidewalk, their stances wide and intimidating. They wore black tactical vests with community enforcement printed in bold white letters. Behind them, Linda Whitfield stood with her arms crossed, her thin lips stretched, in what might have been trying to pass for a smile, but looked more like a sneer. Malik's stomach dropped. He slowed his bike, pulling out his earbuds as the larger of the two men, the one with close-cropped hair and a red face, held up his hand in a stop gesture. "Hold it right there," the man barked. His vest was slightly too small, straining across his chest. The name tag read, Rick. Malik's heart began to pound, but he kept his voice steady. "Is there a problem?" The second man, leaner with cold eyes, moved to Malik's left. His name tag identified him as Dale. The positioning wasn't lost on Malik. They were boxing him in. Linda stepped forward, her wedge heels clicking on the pavement. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the neighborhood," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Several residents have noticed an unfamiliar young man lurking around their properties." "Lurking?" Malik's grip tightened on his handlebars. "I live here. I'm just coming home from practice." Rick snorted. "Sure you do, kid. We're going to need to see some ID." "This is my neighborhood," Malik repeated, heat rising in his face. "I've lived here for 3 years. Mrs. Whitfield knows that." Linda's eyebrows arched in exaggerated surprise. "Do I? There are so many new faces these days. One can't be too careful about neighborhood security." Dale moved closer, his hand resting on something at his hip. Not quite a weapon, but the implication was clear. The lady asked for ID. Let's see it. Malik's mind raced. These weren't real cops. He knew that much. The vests looked cheap, like something bought online. But they were still 2 grown men, and the way they were positioned made his skin crawl. "I'm 16, Malik said, forcing himself to meet Rick's hostile stare. "I'm coming home from basketball practice at Oak Ridge High. You can see my jersey right here." He gestured to his practice uniform, visible under his unzipped hoodie. "Anyone can buy a jersey," Rick sneered. "For all we know, you stole it." The accusation hit Malik like a slap. He thought about his father's warnings about staying calm in situations like this, about not giving anyone an excuse. But anger bubbled up in his chest anyway. "Stole it?" His voice cracked slightly. "I'm the starting point guard. Coach Matthews can verify that." Or you could just ask any of our actual neighbors, since you're so concerned about neighborhood security. Linda's face hardened. Don't take that tone with our security team, young man. They're here to protect our community values. Community values? Malik couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. Is that what you call this? Rick stepped forward, closing the distance. His breath smelled of coffee and something stronger. Listen here, smart mouth. Either you show us some ID right now, or we're going to have a real problem. Dale circled around behind Malik's bike. Probably stolen, too, he muttered, just loud enough to be heard. Malik's pulse thundered in his ears. The bike had been a birthday present from his parents. He'd helped his dad assemble it in their garage, learning about gear ratios and brake calibration. The suggestion that he'd stolen it made his vision blur with anger. This is harassment, Malik said, his voice shaking slightly despite his effort to stay calm. You're not real police officers. You can't demand my ID. Linda's face lit up with triumphant malice. Oh? If you have nothing to hide, why are you being so difficult? Seems suspicious to me. Rick's hand shot out, grabbing for Malik's arm. His meaty fingers closed around Malik's wrist with bruising force. Linda's voice carried the satisfaction of someone who'd just won a game, only she was playing. See? Caught red-handed. Malik's heart hammered against his ribs as Rick's grip tightened. The evening air felt suddenly thick and hard to breathe. His bike tilted precariously as Dale moved in closer, the two men forming a cage of tactical vests and barely contained aggression. The situation was spiraling, and Malik could feel control slipping away like water through his fingers. Let him go. Now! The voice cut through the tension like a knife, calm but carrying the kind of authority that made everyone freeze. Malik recognized his father's tone immediately. It was the same one he'd used during his FBI days when confronting suspects. Reginald Carter stood at the end of their driveway in his gray jogging shorts and moisture-wicking shirt, his arms crossed over his chest. Despite his casual attire, there was nothing relaxed about his stance. His eyes scanned the scene with precise, analytical focus. Rick's grip on Malik's wrist loosened slightly, but he didn't let go. This is official community business, he growled, though some of the previous confidence had leaked from his voice. Stay out of it. Reginald took 3 measured steps forward. Is that right? His gaze moved deliberately from Rick's vest to Dale's, then to their belts and boots. Interesting choice of equipment you've got there. Those vests, Chinese knockoffs, aren't they? The stitching's already coming loose at the shoulders. Dale shifted his weight uncomfortably. Linda stepped forward, her heels clicking against the pavement with sharp, angry taps. Mr. Carter, she said, forcing a diplomatic smile. These gentlemen are authorized security personnel, hired by the HOA board to protect our community. Your son was being uncooperative when asked for simple identification. Authorized by whom? Reginald's voice remained level, but his eyes hardened. Because I'm looking at your badges right now, and I'm seeing some serious problems. The holographic overlay is missing, for one. And that font? He shook his head. Not even close to regulation. Rick finally released Malik's wrist, taking a half step back. Listen, buddy. I'm not your buddy, Reginald cut him off. And that radio on your belt? The antenna's solid plastic. It's a prop, probably from a costume shop. He pointed to their truck parked halfway down the block. Just like that magnetic decal on your pickup. The one that's peeling at the corners. Malik wheeled his bike backward, creating some distance between himself and the increasingly nervous-looking men. He'd seen his father work before, during career day at school once, but this was different. This was personal. Linda's face had gone from pink to red. Now, see here. No, you see here, Reginald interrupted, his voice dropping lower. Those vests you're wearing? They're marked with community enforcement. in a way that's deliberately meant to be confused with actual law enforcement. That's not just poor judgment. That's a federal offense. Dale's hand, which had been hovering near his hip, dropped to his side. The cold look in his eyes had been replaced by something closer to worry. "We were hired to do a job," Rick protested, but his voice had lost its edge. "The HOA president hired you to intimidate residents?" Reginald took another step forward. "To harass teenage boys on their way home from basketball practice? To impersonate law enforcement officers?" Linda's diplomatic mask cracked completely. "Now you listen to me, Mr. Carter. I won't have you threatening our security team. The board approved this measure to protect property values and community standards. The board approved hiring fake cops to patrol the neighborhood?" Reginald raised an eyebrow. "I'd be very interested in seeing those meeting minutes, along with the licensing and insurance documentation for your security team." Rick and Dale exchanged glances. The swagger they'd shown earlier had evaporated in the face of Reginald's methodical dismantling of their authority. "And those weapons you're carrying?" Reginald continued. "I'm assuming you have the proper permits." "Because impersonating law enforcement while armed adds some particularly serious charges to the situation." The color drained from Dale's face. Rick's hands had started to tremble slightly. "This is ridiculous," Linda snapped, but her voice had gone up an octave. "You can't just—" "I can," Reginald said softly. "And I will. 20 years with the FBI, Mrs. Whitfield. 15 of those in counterintelligence. I've spent my career dealing with people who think they can create their own authority." He turned his attention back to Rick and Dale. "So, let me be very clear. Impersonating law enforcement is a federal crime. Do you really want to test me on this?" The silence that followed was deafening. The evening air felt electric with tension. Malik watched as his father stood perfectly still, his presence filling the street more completely than Rick and Dale's attempted intimidation ever had. Linda's perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms. The two men seemed to be shrinking inside their tactical vests. The borrowed authority they'd worn so confidently just minutes ago, now hanging off them like ill-fitting clothes. The transformation was remarkable. The same men who had tried to cage Malik in, who had accused him of theft and grabbed him, now looked like they wanted nothing more than to disappear. Their tough guy act had crumbled under the weight of real authority. Not the kind that came from fake badges and tactical gear, but the kind that came from decades of actual law enforcement experience and the absolute certainty of knowing exactly where you stand. Malik felt his racing heart begin to slow. The fear and anger of moments ago replaced by something else. Pride, maybe, or relief, or a mixture of both. He watched his father stand there, calm and immovable in his jogging clothes, and understood that this was what real power looked like. Not intimidation, not threats, but the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly what they're talking about and isn't afraid to stand their ground. Linda's voice rose shrilly, echoing down the quiet suburban street. "I have the authority to keep this neighborhood safe. The board gave me full discretion to implement security measures." Movement flickered behind curtained windows as neighbors peered out at the confrontation. Doors cracked open slightly, and a few brave souls ventured onto their porches to watch. "Your authority doesn't extend to hiring thugs to harass residents," Reginald replied, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "Or did you forget that this is still America, where we have actual laws?" Rick and Dale had taken several steps back, their bravado deflating with each passing moment. They shot dark looks at Malik, but kept their distance now that they'd been exposed. Their hands still hovered near their fake badges, as if clinging to the last shreds of their pretend authority. Mr. Whitman emerged from his house across the street, his thin frame rigid with disapproval. "Now see here, Carter," he called out, his voice reedy with age and indignation. Linda's just trying to maintain standards. We've had incidents in the neighborhood lately. Incidents? Reginald turned slightly to face him, though he kept Rick and Dale in his peripheral vision. Would these be the same incidents that mysteriously started happening right after we moved in? Mr. Whitman's face flushed. That's not what I— Yes, it is exactly what you meant, came another voice, strong and accented. Ms. Elena Alvarez stepped out of her house next door, her silver hair catching the early evening light. Let's be honest about what's happening here. Linda's head snapped toward Ms. Alvarez. Nobody asked for your input, Elena. I'm giving it anyway, Ms. Alvarez replied firmly. She walked down her driveway, her comfortable shoes scraping against the concrete. I've watched you target the Carter family since the day they arrived. The constant complaints about their grass being a quarter-inch too high, the claims about suspicious activity when Malik practices basketball in his own driveway. We have standards, Linda's voice cracked with fury. This is a respectable neighborhood. It was respectable, Ms. Alvarez agreed, until you started hiring fake police to intimidate children. More neighbors had emerged now, forming loose clusters on lawns and driveways. Some nodded in agreement with Ms. Alvarez, while others huddled closer to Linda's side of the street, murmuring their support for community safety measures. Rick cleared his throat. Look, we don't want any trouble. You should have thought of that before putting on those costumes, Reginald cut in. I suggest you both leave. Now. And don't come back unless you want me to make some calls to actual law enforcement about your little impersonation act. The two men backed away toward their truck, trying to maintain some dignity but clearly eager to escape. Their boots scuffed against the pavement as they retreated, the sound emphasizing the awkwardness of their departure. This is outrageous. Linda's perfectly styled hair had started to come loose, matching her increasingly unraveled composure. Mr. Whitman, you're on the board. Tell them. Tell them about all the complaints we've received. Mr. Whitman shifted uncomfortably. Well, there have been concerns raised about certain elements. Say what you really mean, Ms. Alvarez challenged him. Because I've lived here 15 years, and I never heard about certain elements until the Carters moved in. Linda's face contorted with rage. She jabbed a manicured finger toward Reginald. You think you're so clever with your federal agent background? You don't belong here. None of you do. This neighborhood has traditions, standards, prejudices, Ms. Alvarez interjected. Values, Linda shrieked. Her mask of respectability had completely slipped now, revealing the ugly truth beneath. And I won't let you destroy them. This isn't over, Carter. Not by a long shot. Reginald regarded her calmly. You're right about one thing, Mrs. Whitfield. This isn't over. But I don't think it's going to end the way you expect. He turned to Malik, placing a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. Let's go inside, son. As they walked up their driveway, Malik glanced back. Linda had pulled out her phone, her fingers flying over the screen. Despite her recent humiliation, a sly smile played across her lips. She looked up, caught Malik watching, and her smile widened into something predatory. The neighbors began to disperse, some shaking their heads in disgust, others clustered in small groups trading whispered opinions. Mrs. Alvarez stood in her driveway, arms crossed, watching Linda with sharp eyes. Thank you, Elena, Reginald called out. She nodded. Enough is enough. I should have spoken up sooner. Mr. Whitman hurried back into his house, slamming his door with more force than necessary. The sound echoed through the now quiet street, punctuating the tension that still hung in the air. Rick and Dale's truck started up with a roar that seemed deliberately loud, its tires squealing slightly as they pulled away. Linda watched them go, still smiling and tapping at her phone, as if the evening's confrontation had merely been the opening move in a larger game. Malik wheeled his bike up the driveway, the normality of the action feeling strange after everything that had just happened. The basketball in his backpack suddenly felt heavier, a reminder of how a simple ride home from practice had turned into something so much more complicated. The kitchen was filled with the aroma of Angela's lasagna, but no one was really focused on eating. Angela stood at the counter, her hands planted firmly on the granite surface, her nursing scrubs still on from her shift. Her dark eyes blazed with fury as Reginald finished explaining what had happened. "They put their hands on our son?" Her voice trembled. "Those fake cops actually tried to grab our boy?" Malik pushed his food around his plate, the pasta sliding back and forth without purpose. "Mom, Dad handled it. He made them look stupid." "That's not the point." Angela's palm slapped against the counter. "They could have hurt you. What if your father hadn't been there? What if—" She stopped, pressing her lips together as tears threatened to spill. Reginald set down his fork. "Angela, sit down. Please. We need to discuss this calmly." "Calmly?" She whirled to face him. "That woman hired thugs to terrorize our son. There's nothing calm about that." "Mom." Malik's voice was soft. He'd rarely seen his mother this angry, and it scared him a little. Angela took a deep breath, and finally sat down at the table. Her hands were shaking as she reached for her water glass. "I'm sorry, baby. When I think about what could have happened—" "But it didn't," Reginald said firmly. "And now we need to think strategically about our next steps." "Strategic?" Angela's laugh was bitter. "Like we were strategic about moving to this neighborhood? Checking crime statistics, researching school districts, making sure it was safe?" She made air quotes around the last word. Malik set his fork down with a clatter. "Maybe we should just move." "No." Reginald's voice was quiet but absolute. "We're not running." "That's exactly what they want." "Then what are we supposed to do?" Malik burst out. His fear and frustration finally boiled over. "What happens next time? What if they really try to take me? What if they follow me when I'm alone or— His voice cracked. Angela reached across the table and grabbed his hand. "Baby, look at me. We won't let that happen." "Your mother's right," Reginald said. "But we need to be smart about this. Linda Whitfield isn't just some random racist. She's calculating. Those men today? That was a test. She wanted to see how we'd react." "And how should we react?" Angela demanded. "Because right now, I want to march over there and show her exactly what happens when she threatens my child." Malik couldn't help but smile a little at that. His mom might be a nurse, dedicated to helping people, but she was also fierce when it came to protecting her family. "We document everything," Reginald said. He pushed back from the table and stood up. "Every incident, every interaction, every witness. We build a case." "Like you used to do?" Malik asked. He'd heard stories about his dad's FBI days, though Reginald rarely talked about them directly. "Exactly like that." Reginald left the kitchen and returned a moment later with a leather briefcase Malik had never seen before. He set it on the table and opened it carefully. "What's all this?" Angela leaned forward, curious despite her anger. Reginald pulled out his old FBI badge, setting it on the table with a solid thunk. The metal caught the light from overhead, still shiny despite years in storage. Next came files, neat and organized, their edges crisp. "Your old case files?" Malik reached for one, but Reginald gently moved it away. "Some of them, examples of how to build evidence against people who think they're untouchable." He spread the files out. "See these? Organizations that thought they were above the law. People who believed their money or connections would protect them. They were all wrong." Angela touched one of the files. "You really think we can fight them legally?" "I know we can." Reginald's confidence was absolute. "Linda made a crucial mistake today. She crossed the line from harassment into criminal behavior. Those men impersonated law enforcement officers. That's federal territory. But will anyone care? Malik asked quietly. The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of past disappointments. Ms. Alvarez cared, Reginald pointed out. And others will too. We just need to give them something solid to stand behind. Evidence, documentation, a clear pattern of behavior that can't be ignored or explained away. Angela straightened in her chair, some of her nursing practicality returning. I'll start keeping records of every interaction. Dates, times, witnesses. Good. Reginald nodded. Malik, I want you to carry your phone at all times. Record any confrontations, but only if you can do it safely. Your safety comes first. Always. What about Linda's phone calls? Malik remembered her smug smile as she'd tapped away at her screen. She was definitely planning something. Oh, we'll find out who she was calling, Reginald assured him. People like Linda think they're clever, but they always leave trails. They get sloppy because they're so convinced of their own righteousness. Angela reached out and touched the FBI badge, her fingers tracing the edges. I haven't seen this in years. Not since you retired. I never thought I'd need it again, Reginald admitted. But maybe this is why I kept it. To remind me that justice doesn't retire, even if I did. Malik looked at the badge, the files, his parents' determined faces. The fear in his chest wasn't gone, but it felt different now. More manageable. So, we're really going to fight back? Yes, all three of them said at once. And finally, they shared a genuine smile. The morning sun hadn't yet burned away the dew when Malik stepped out to grab the newspaper. His muscles were still sore from yesterday's basketball practice, but that wasn't what made him freeze on the doorstep. There, taped prominently to their front door, was a bright orange notice with the HOA logo at the top. Malik's hands shook slightly as he pulled it down. The paper was thick, official-looking, with Linda Whitfield's signature scrawled at the bottom in angry black ink. Notice of violation, it read in bold letters. Below that were itemized complaints. Grass length exceeds regulated 2.5 inches by approximately 0.75 inches. Trash receptacles visible from street outside of designated collection times. Unapproved vehicle, bicycle, stored in visible location. You've got to be kidding me, Malik muttered. He'd measured the grass himself when he mowed it 2 days ago, using the special gauge his dad had bought specifically to comply with HOA rules. And the trash cans? They were exactly where they were supposed to be, tucked against the garage wall. The screen door creaked behind him. What's that? Angela asked, still in her morning robe, coffee mug in hand. Malik handed her the notice. Her face darkened as she read it, her grip tightening on the paper until it crinkled at the edges. Your father needs to see this, she said, her voice tight. He's in his office. They found Reginald already awake and working at his desk, surrounded by open files and his laptop screen glowing with what looked like property records. Started early? Angela asked, passing him the notice. Couldn't sleep, Reginald admitted. He read the paper carefully, his expression unchanging. Notice the timestamp? 6:45 a.m. She wanted to make sure we saw it first thing. But it's all lies, Malik protested. The grass isn't too long, and the trash cans. I know, Reginald cut him off gently. That's not the point. This is her first official move. She's establishing a paper trail. Angela crossed her arms. For what? To build a case that we're problem residents, Reginald explained. She'll use these violations to justify escalating actions later. Malik slumped against the wall. So what do we do? Document everything. Reginald stood up and grabbed his phone. Come on. They followed him outside where he methodically photographed the lawn from multiple angles, including close-ups with a ruler showing the exact grass height. He took pictures of the trash can placement and Malik's bike in the garage. Time and date stamps on everything, he explained, tapping his phone. We'll need... The rumble of an engine made them all look up. A silver Mercedes crept past their house at walking speed. Linda Whitfield clearly visible behind the wheel. She lifted her hand in an exaggerated wave, her smile sharp and mocking. Angela started forward, but Reginald caught her arm. "Wait." He raised his phone and took several clear photos of Linda's car and her obvious surveillance of their home. She saw him doing it, and her smile faltered for just a moment before she accelerated away. "That's harassment," Angela said. "Plain and simple." "Yes, it is." Reginald's voice was grim. "And we're going to prove it." They went back inside, and Reginald immediately started making calls. Malik tried to focus on his homework, but he could hear his father's voice getting increasingly tense from the other room. Finally, Reginald called them both into the living room. His face was set in hard lines. "Linda filed a police report this morning," he said without preamble. "She's claiming Malik was loitering suspiciously yesterday and made threatening gestures toward authorized HOA security personnel." "What?" Angela exploded. "Those weren't even real security guards. They were thugs she hired to intimidate our son." "I know." Reginald's calm was scary now. "I spoke to the desk officer. He said they're taking her complaint very seriously, given her position in the community." "But that's crazy!" Malik felt his chest tighten. "You were there, Dad. You saw what really happened." "Yes, and I made sure that's in the official record." Reginald started pacing, something Malik had never seen him do before. "But they're not interested in my statement. The officer actually suggested that maybe you should avoid certain areas of the neighborhood." Angela made a sound of pure outrage. "In our own neighborhood? The one we pay taxes in? The one where we own our home?" "It gets worse," Reginald continued. "Linda's apparently been busy. She's gathered signatures from some neighbors supporting her claim that there have been suspicious youth activities in the area. She's pushing for increased security measures, including regular patrols." "By those fake cops?" Malik asked, his voice small. "No, she's learned from that mistake. She's trying to get real off-duty officers to moonlight as security. Using HOA funds, of course." Angela sank onto the couch. "So she's actually gaining support? People are believing her lies?" "Some are," Reginald admitted. "Others are just afraid to stand against her. But that's not the point right now." "Then what is?" Malik asked. Reginald stopped pacing and faced them both. His expression was cold and determined, reminding Malik of all the stories he'd heard about his father's FBI days. "The point is, this isn't harassment anymore," he said, his voice hard. "This is a war. And Linda has no idea who she's fighting." At the police station, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Reginald stood at the front desk, his posture military straight. The desk officer barely looked up from his computer, his fingers tapping on the keyboard with deliberate slowness. "So you're saying 2 men impersonated law enforcement officers?" The officer's tone was flat, uninterested. "That's correct," Reginald replied evenly. "They wore counterfeit badges and tactical gear marked as community enforcement. They attempted to detain my 16-year-old son." The officer finally looked up, his expression bordering on condescending. "And this was on private property? In your HOA-controlled neighborhood?" "On a public street within the neighborhood, yes. But that's irrelevant to the crime of impersonating." "Sir," the officer cut him off, "if the HOA hired private security—" "They didn't," Reginald interrupted, placing photographs on the counter. "These men, Rick Thompson and Dale Matthews, have no security licenses. Their badges are fake. Their vehicle markings are magnetic decals, and they attempted to physically detain a minor." The officer glanced at the photos without picking them up. "Look, Mr. Carter, I understand you're upset, but Mrs. Whitfield has already explained that this was just a misunderstanding. They're neighborhood watch volunteers who maybe got a little overzealous. Neighborhood watch volunteers don't wear tactical gear or pretend to have arrest powers. Reginald's voice was steel-edged now. And Linda Whitfield has no authority to— Mrs. Whitfield is a respected member of this community. The officer's emphasis on Mrs. was pointed. She's worked closely with our department for years. If she says there was no criminal intent, well, he shrugged. Maybe your son just misunderstood their approach? Reginald leaned forward slightly. I was there. I witnessed it. And I spent 20 years with the FBI dealing with exactly this kind of— Then you understand how these things work. The officer cut in again. Sometimes it's better to handle community matters. Within the community. He pushed the photos back across the counter. I'll file your report, but I wouldn't expect much follow-up. Meanwhile, at Oak Ridge High School, Malik sat in the cafeteria, picking at his lunch. The usual buzz of conversation surrounded him, but something felt off. He kept noticing quick glances in his direction, followed by whispered conversations. Hey, a voice said quietly. It was Marcus, from the basketball team. He slid into the seat across from Malik, looking uncomfortable. You okay, man? Yeah, why wouldn't I be? Marcus glanced around before leaning in. People are talking. My mom's on the HOA board with that Whitfield lady. She came home yesterday all worked up about some emergency meeting. Malik's stomach tightened. What kind of meeting? They're saying— Marcus lowered his voice further. They're trying to find ways to force your family out. Like, pile up so many violations and fines that you'll have to move. From 2 tables over, Malik caught fragments of conversation. Causing trouble. Property values. Not our kind of— He stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly. Several heads turned his way, then quickly looked away. His lunch sat half-eaten, but he couldn't stomach another bite. The rest of the school day passed in a blur. Every whispered conversation felt like it was about him. Every stare seemed hostile. By the time the final bell rang, Malik's shoulders were tight with tension. He biked home as fast as he could, taking the long way around to avoid Linda's street. But when he pulled into his driveway, his heart sank. Another HOA notice was taped to the door, this one in a red envelope. Inside, he found his mother already home from her nursing shift, still in her scrubs. Mom? Angela looked up, her face tight with anger. She was holding an identical red envelope, already opened. You saw it too? What does it say? She pulled out the letter, her hands shaking slightly. Notice of non-compliant recreational equipment. She read aloud. The basketball hoop installed on your property exceeds height restrictions and creates an unsightly street view. Immediate removal is required. Failure to comply within 48 hours will result in fines of $100 per day and possible liens against the property. But we've had that hoop for months, Malik protested. Nobody said anything before. Of course they didn't. Angela's voice was bitter. Because before, they weren't trying to— She stopped suddenly, looking at Malik's face. How was school today? They know, he said quietly. Everyone's talking about how the HOA wants us gone. Angela's face flushed with fury. She looked down at the letter in her hands, then suddenly tore it in half. Then quarters, then eighths. Red paper fragments fluttered to the floor. I have had enough, she shouted, her voice cracking. That woman thinks she can bully us? Threaten my child? Turn our neighbors against us? She threw the pieces into the trash can with violent force. We're not taking down anything. Not one single thing. Mom! Malik had never seen his mother this angry. No, baby. She pulled him into a fierce hug. You listen to me. This is our home. We worked for it. We earned it. And no small-minded, power-hungry bigot is going to drive us out of it. She held him at arm's length, her eyes blazing. Your father may want to handle this his way, but I've got some ideas of my own. That woman has no idea who she's dealing with. The next morning, Malik trudged down the driveway to check the mail, the Texas sun already beating down despite the early hour. As he reached for the mailbox, he heard shuffling footsteps and muttering from next door. Mr. Whitman stood at his own mailbox, rifling through envelopes and speaking just loud enough to be heard, causing nothing but trouble since they moved in. Property values dropping, neighborhood going downhill. Malik's hand froze on the mailbox door. His jaw clenched. "Don't pay any attention to him, dear." The gentle voice came from behind him. Mrs. Alvarez approached with her small dog on a leash, her silver hair neatly styled despite the humidity. Some people are stuck in the past, but they don't speak for everyone. Mr. Whitman's head snapped up. He glared at Ms. Alvarez, then slammed his mailbox shut and stalked back toward his house, still muttering. "Thank you," Malik said quietly, pulling out his family's mail. More red envelopes. His stomach turned. Ms. Alvarez touched his arm gently. "You know, I taught here for 30 years before retiring. I've seen people like Linda Whitfield come and go. They always think they can bully others into leaving, but they're the ones who end up exposed for what they are. Sometimes it feels like everyone's against us," Malik admitted. "Not everyone. Not even close." Ms. Alvarez's kind eyes hardened slightly. "Linda's calling a community meeting tonight, trying to push through some new rules, but she's going to find out that not all of us are willing to be silent anymore." Later that evening, the community center buzzed with tension as neighbors filed in. Linda stood at the front, perfectly coiffed in an expensive blazer, arranging papers on the podium. Her two fake security guards, Rick and Dale, lounged near the door trying to look intimidating. Malik sat between his parents in the back row. He noticed Ms. Alvarez a few rows ahead, sitting straight-backed and alert. Mr. Whitman huddled with a group of Linda's supporters near the front, shooting occasional glances back at the Carters. "Thank you all for coming," Linda's voice dripped with false warmth. "We're here to discuss some urgent changes needed to protect our community standards." Reginald quietly slipped his phone from his pocket, pressing record. "First," Linda continued, "we need stricter enforcement of height restrictions on all outdoor equipment. Basketball hoops, play structures, anything that creates an unsightly street view must be removed." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A young mother raised her hand. "But my kid's swing set." "Existing structures will be grandfathered in." Linda cut her off smoothly. "This only applies to newer residents." Reginald's phone captured every word as Linda outlined more targeted rules. No parking on the street between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. No gatherings of more than 3 non-resident youth without prior HOA approval. Mandatory security cameras facing the street. Additionally, Linda's smile turned predatory. "We'll be implementing a new approval process for any exterior modifications. This includes paint colors, landscaping, and security measures like cameras or lighting." Ms. Alvarez's hand shot up. "And who exactly will be on this approval committee?" "The board will select qualified residents who understand proper community standards," Linda replied smoothly. "You mean people who'll do whatever you tell them," Ms. Alvarez said sharply. Linda's smile tightened. "I'm simply trying to protect property values and community safety. Surely we all want that." Her eyes flickered to the Carters. "Unless some people have something to hide." Angela started to rise, but Reginald placed a gentle hand on her arm. His phone kept recording. "These new rules will require a significant increase in enforcement," Linda continued. "So we'll be expanding our security team." "You mean those fake cops who tried to grab my son?" Angela's voice cut through the room like a whip. Linda's face flushed. "Our community enforcement officers are volunteers who illegally impersonated law enforcement. Reginald's calm voice carried from the back. Several heads turned. That was a misunderstanding, Linda snapped. And if certain people would cooperate with security instead of causing trouble? What kind of trouble exactly? Ms. Alvarez stood up. Being black in their own neighborhood? The room erupted in overlapping voices. Mr. Whitman and his group shouted about property values and standards, while others protested the obvious targeting of the rules. Order! Linda banged her hand on the podium. This is exactly why we need stricter enforcement. Our community is being disrupted by people who don't understand our values. Your values, Linda, Ms. Alvarez interrupted, not ours. These rules will be implemented. Linda's voice turned cold. The board has already approved them. This meeting is merely a courtesy notification. Really? Reginald's voice remained steady. Because, according to HOA bylaws, any new rules requiring additional funding need a community vote. And I'm quite certain hiring private security, fake or otherwise, isn't in the current budget. Linda's face twisted. We have discretionary funds, which can't be used without membership approval, Ms. Alvarez added. I may be retired, but I can still read a budget. More voices joined in, questioning the rules, the costs, the obvious discrimination. Linda's supporters grew louder, defensive. Rick and Dale shifted uncomfortably by the door as the meeting dissolved into chaos. Through it all, Reginald's phone kept recording as Linda's carefully constructed facade cracked, revealing more and more of her true intentions with every angry response. The afternoon sun blazed overhead as Malik approached the community pool. He needed to cool off after his morning run, both from the heat and the stress of everything happening. His blue pool membership card felt sweaty in his palm as he walked through the gate. Mrs. Peterson, one of Linda's friends, nudged another woman beside her. They both stared at him from their lounge chairs, whispering behind their sunglasses. A group of kids from school huddled at the far end of the pool, pointing and murmuring. Malik lifted his chin and walked toward an empty chair. He'd learned from his dad. Don't let them see you bothered. Act like you belong, because you do. Excuse me. A thin man in a polo shirt with pool manager embroidered on it stepped in front of Malik. I need to see your membership card. Malik held it out, the same card he'd used all summer. The manager, Todd, according to his name tag, studied it like it was foreign money. I'm sorry, but this card has been revoked. What? Malik's voice came out sharper than he intended. More heads turned their way. That's impossible. We paid our dues. Todd shifted uncomfortably. I received orders from the HOA board this morning. Your family's pool privileges have been suspended pending a review of, multiple violations. Heat crept up Malik's neck that had nothing to do with the sun. What violations? I'm just following orders, Todd said, not meeting his eyes. You'll need to leave immediately. Mrs. Peterson and her friend weren't even trying to hide their satisfaction now. The kids at the far end had gone quiet, watching the scene unfold. This is crazy, Malik said. You can't just... Should I call security? Todd glanced toward the parking lot where Rick's truck sat idling, both him and Dale visible in the front seat. Malik's stomach clenched. The fake cops were actually waiting for something like this. He looked around the pool area, at the smirking adults, the staring kids, the nervous manager. The message was clear. You're not welcome here. He backed away, trying to keep his movements calm and controlled like his father would. But inside, humiliation burned through him like acid. As he walked toward the exit, he heard one of the kids whisper, Told you they'd get rid of him. The gate clanged shut behind him. Rick revved his truck's engine as Malik passed, a wordless threat. He kept walking, one foot in front of the other, until he was around the corner and out of sight. Only then did he let his shoulders slump. Only then did he feel the full weight of being treated like an outsider in his own neighborhood. Later that night, Malik heard his father's study door close. Reginald had been in there for hours, the soft click of his keyboard the only sound. Curious and unable to sleep, Malik padded down the hallway and knocked softly. "Come in," Reginald called. His father sat at his desk, the computer screen's glow reflecting off his glasses. Multiple windows were open: social media profiles, news articles, forum posts. "What are you working on?" Malik asked. "Remember how I said Rick and Dale seemed too organized to be random thugs?" Reginald's voice was tight. "I was right. They're part of something bigger." He pointed to his screen. A cached web page showed Rick and Dale in tactical gear, posed with a larger group of armed men. The banner read, "Patriots Defense League, Texas Chapter." "It's a militia group," Reginald explained. "They claim to be about community defense, but they're really vigilantes. They hire themselves out to handle neighborhood problems." His mouth twisted on the words. "Like us?" Malik asked quietly. "Like anyone they think doesn't belong." Reginald clicked through more pages. "They're careful about their public image, but their private forums tell a different story. Linda didn't just hire random security. She connected with a network of people who share her views." Malik leaned closer, scanning the screen. Posts about protecting property values and maintaining community standards thinly veiled their real message. "Look at this." Reginald pulled up financial records. "The company Linda hired for security services. It's a shell corporation. Traces back to the militia's leadership." "How did you find all this?" A small smile crossed Reginald's face. 20 years in counterintelligence teaches you a few things. These groups think they're clever with their encrypted messages and hidden connections, but they always leave traces if you know where to look. He leaned back in his chair, studying the screen. In the blue glow, his expression hardened. Rick Thompson and Dale Matthews. Multiple aliases. Connection to at least 3 other neighborhood enforcement incidents in the past year. All following the same pattern. Reginald's fingers moved across the keyboard, documenting everything. "They think they're hunters," he said quietly. "But they forgot. Some of us know how to hunt too." His father's voice dropped to barely a whisper as he stared at the evidence filling his screen. "Now I know who you are." Malik watched his father work, feeling a mix of pride and worry. The pool incident had been humiliating, but maybe it was pushing them toward something bigger. His dad wasn't just fighting Linda anymore. He was unraveling an entire network of hate hiding behind HOA rules and fake badges. The next evening, Malik dragged the heavy trash bin toward the curb. The street lights cast long shadows across the lawn, and cicadas buzzed in the humid night air. His muscles still ached from basketball practice, but Wednesday was garbage night, and he'd promised his mom he'd take care of it. The wheels of the bin rattled against the concrete as he pushed it along the side of the house. A twig snapped behind him. Before he could turn, rough hands grabbed his shoulders and slammed him against the wooden fence. "Hey there, troublemaker," Rick's voice growled in his ear. The man's tactical vest pressed against Malik's back, reeking of cigarette smoke and sweat. Dale stepped into view, blocking any escape route. "Linda says you're not getting the message." His voice was quieter than Rick's, but just as menacing. Malik's heart hammered in his chest. He tried to push back, but Rick's grip was like iron. "Get off me!" "Or what?" Rick twisted Malik's arm behind his back. "Gonna cry for Daddy?" "You don't belong here," Dale said, moving closer. "Linda wants you gone. We can do this the easy way, or—" He cracked his knuckles. Malik remembered his father's lessons about staying calm under pressure, but fear and anger clouded his thoughts. He kicked backward, catching Rick in the shin. Rick cursed and yanked Malik's arm higher. Pain shot through his shoulder. "Bad move, kid!" Dale's fist drove into Malik's stomach, knocking the wind out of him. He doubled over, gasping. "Not so tough now, huh?" Rick shoved him face first into the fence. Splinters dug into Malik's cheek. Malik struggled to breathe, to think. These men weren't just trying to scare him anymore. They wanted to hurt him. Really hurt him. "Help!" he shouted, finding his voice. "Somebody help!" Dale's hand clamped over his mouth. "Shut up!" Malik bit down hard on Dale's fingers. The man yelped and jerked back. Rick spun Malik around and slammed him against the fence again. Stars exploded behind his eyes. "You little—" Rick drew back his fist. "Hey!" A voice rang out from across the street. "What are you doing?" Porch lights flicked on. Front doors opened. Ms. Alvarez stood on her lawn in her bathrobe, already dialing her phone. "Mr. Tu?" Chen from next door rushed toward them, shouting. Rick released Malik, who crumpled to the ground. His vision swam as he watched the two men sprint toward their truck. "Call the police!" someone yelled. "Malik!" His mother's voice cut through the chaos. She must have heard the commotion from inside. "Oh, God, Malik!" He tried to push himself up, but his arms shook too much. Everything hurt. Angela reached him first, dropping to her knees beside him. "Baby, what did they do to you?" Her hands fluttered over his face, his arms checking for injuries. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Malik tasted blood from where his lip had split. His shoulder throbbed where Rick had twisted it. Each breath sent sharp pains through his ribs where Dale had punched him. "I'm okay, Mom," he managed, but his voice came out weak and shaky. More neighbors gathered around them. Ms. Alvarez knelt beside Angela, her phone still pressed to her ear. "Police are on their way. Ambulance, too." "Those men," Mr. Chen said, "they were the same ones from before? The fake security." Angela's arms wrapped around Malik, gentle but protective. He could feel her trembling with rage and fear. "They could have killed him," she sobbed. "They could have killed my baby." Malik leaned into his mother's embrace, too drained to feel embarrassed about crying in front of the neighbors. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving him cold despite the warm night. Red and blue lights flashed in the distance, getting closer. Someone had brought out a lawn chair, and Angela helped Malik sit in it. His whole body ached. "Did anyone get their license plate?" a neighbor asked. "I got photos," another replied, of them running to their truck. Malik closed his eyes, listening to the voices around him. The same neighbors who had watched silently while Linda harassed them were now offering help, expressing outrage. It shouldn't have taken violence to wake them up, but at least they were finally seeing the truth. Angela hadn't stopped crying, her tears falling onto Malik's shoulder as she held him. He wanted to tell her he was fine, that it wasn't as bad as it looked, but he couldn't find the energy to speak. The police cars pulled up, followed by an ambulance. Its harsh lights illuminated the scene. The overturned trash bin, the scuff marks on the fence, the small spots of blood on Malik's t-shirt. Evidence of how quickly an ordinary evening had turned into a nightmare. As paramedics approached with their equipment, Malik heard his mother whisper, "They're not getting away with this. Not this time." He knew she was right. This attack had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But right now, with his body battered and his mother's tears soaking his shirt, all he could do was sit there and try to breathe through the pain, surrounded by neighbors who had finally decided to stand witness. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room cast harsh shadows across Malik's bruised face as he sat on the examination table. The paper covering crinkled beneath him with each small movement. Angela hadn't let go of his hand since they arrived, her grip tightening every time he winced. Dr. Martinez gently pressed along Malik's ribs, causing him to suck in a sharp breath. "Bruised, but not broken," she said, making notes on her tablet. "You're lucky. It could have been much worse." "Lucky?" Angela's voice cracked. "Those men attacked my 16-year-old son." The doctor's expression softened with sympathy. I understand, Mrs. Carter. I'm documenting everything thoroughly for the police report. The bruising, the shoulder strain, the facial lacerations. We'll take photos, too. Reginald paced near the door, his phone pressed to his ear. His usual calm demeanor was cracking around the edges, jaw clenched as he listened to the police dispatcher. "Yes, I want to press charges," he said, voice tight with controlled anger. "Two men assaulted my teenage son. We have multiple witnesses, photos of their vehicle, and now medical evidence." He paused, listening. "No, that's not acceptable. I want to speak to a detective now." Dr. Martinez finished her examination and stepped back. "The good news is nothing's broken. The bad news is you're going to be pretty sore for a while. I'll prescribe some pain medication and anti-inflammatory drugs." Malik nodded, too drained to speak. His split lip throbbed, and his shoulder felt like it was on fire. The hospital gown made him feel small and vulnerable. Angela brushed her fingers through his hair, careful to avoid the spot where his head had hit the fence. "My baby," she whispered, fresh tears welling up. "Mom, I'm okay," Malik said, though his voice was hoarse. "Really?" The curtain rustled as Officer Bradley entered, notebook in hand. He was different from the responding officers at their house. Older, with gray at his temples, and a paunch stretching his uniform. "Evening, folks," he said, his tone casual, almost bored. "Want to tell me what happened?" Reginald ended his call and turned to face the officer. "Two men, Rick Thompson and Dale Matthews, assaulted my son on our property. We have witnesses, photos, and now medical documentation." Officer Bradley wrote something down, his pen moving lazily. "And you're sure it wasn't just a misunderstanding? Boys roughhousing, maybe?" Angela stood up so fast her chair scraped across the floor. "Roughhousing? Look at my son's face. They ambushed him in the dark." "Ma'am, please calm down," Bradley said, holding up a hand. "I'm just trying to get all the facts." "The facts?" Reginald's voice was deadly quiet. "The facts are that two grown men, who have been harassing my family for weeks, physically attacked my teenage son. The facts are that they're working with Linda Whitfield, who's been using her HOA position to target us. The facts are that you're already trying to minimize this incident." Bradley's expression hardened. "Now, listen here." "No, you listen," Reginald cut him off. "I spent 20 years with the FBI. I know exactly what's happening here. Linda Whitfield has friends in the department, doesn't she? That's why the desk sergeant brushed off our earlier complaints. That's why you're here trying to sweep this under the rug." The officer's face flushed red. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Carter." "And assaulting a minor is a serious crime," Reginald countered. "One that will be prosecuted, with or without your cooperation." Dr. Martinez cleared her throat. "Officer, I've documented extensive bruising consistent with an assault. My report will reflect that." Bradley's pen scratched across his notebook. "I'll file the report, but without clear evidence of intent." "Intent?" Angela stepped toward him. "They told him they wanted him gone. They threatened him. What more intent do you need?" "Witnesses heard them mention Linda Whitfield by name," Reginald added. "This was a coordinated act of intimidation." The officer sighed, closing his notebook. "Look, I understand you're upset, but these things can be complicated. If you want my advice, maybe try talking to your HOA president. Work things out, neighbor to neighbor." Malik watched his father's expression change, not to anger, but to something colder, more determined. Reginald moved to stand between Officer Bradley and the examination table, his presence filling the small space. "Let me be very clear," Reginald said quietly. "I will build this case, piece by piece. Every photo, every witness statement, every medical record. I will document the pattern of harassment, the false police reports, The misuse of HOA funds to hire unlicensed security. And when I'm done, it won't matter who Linda knows in the department, because there will be no way to ignore it. Bradley's dismissive attitude faltered slightly. Are you threatening me, Mr. Carter? I'm promising you that justice will be served, with or without your help. Reginald's voice was steel. Now, are you going to take my son's statement properly, or should I call the state police? The officer looked between them, then pulled out his notebook again. Fine, let's start from the beginning. As Bradley began taking notes, Reginald moved to Malik's side. He placed a gentle kiss on his son's forehead, careful to avoid the bruises. They picked the wrong family, he said softly, but his voice carried the weight of an oath. Malik leaned into his father's strength, watching Officer Bradley write. For the first time since the attack, he felt something besides pain and fear. He felt hope. His father wasn't just angry, he was focused, determined, unstoppable. Linda and her thugs had no idea what they'd started. The living room had transformed overnight. Gone were the family photos and decorative touches that made it homey. Instead, the walls were covered with timelines, photographs, and documents held up by blue painter's tape. The coffee table disappeared under stacks of files and a laptop running multiple searches. Reginald stood in the center of it all, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he connected red strings between photos on the wall. His old FBI badge sat on the table beside him, a reminder of who he was, what he was capable of. Malik watched from the doorway, his bruises still tender but healing. The sight of his father in full investigator mode made his chest swell with pride. This wasn't the quiet, reserved dad who read the morning paper and tended his garden. This was Special Agent Carter, the man who'd spent decades taking down criminals and exposing corruption. "Come here, son," Reginald called, not looking up from the document in his hand. "Let me show you something." Malik moved closer, studying the wall of evidence. There were photos of Rick and Dale's truck, screenshots of social media posts, and financial documents with highlighted sections. "See these bank statements?" Reginald pointed to a series of numbers. "Linda's been skimming from the HOA funds for years. Small amounts at first, then getting bolder. She's funneling money through a fake landscaping company." "How did you get those?" Malik asked, impressed. HOA financial records are available to all homeowners. They just make it difficult to access them. Most people don't bother looking. Reginald smiled grimly. Linda counted on that. He moved to another section of the wall, where photos showed Rick and Dale at various gatherings. Men in tactical gear, practicing with weapons. "Your attackers belong to a local militia group," Reginald explained. "They call themselves Community Defense Force. Linda's been paying them under the table with HOA money, claiming it's for legitimate security services." Malik felt a chill, remembering their rough hands, their hateful words. "They're like, what? Wannabe soldiers?" "Dangerous cosplayers with real guns," Reginald corrected. "And Linda's given them authority they don't legally have. That's going to come back to bite her." He pulled up a chair and gestured for Malik to sit. "Watch this," he said, typing on the laptop. Multiple windows opened, showing social media profiles, business records, and property documents. "Linda presents herself as this perfect HOA president, defender of property values," Reginald continued. "But look here, 3 lawsuits from previous neighborhoods where she served on the board. All settled quietly. Records sealed." Malik leaned in, fascinated. "You can find all this stuff?" "Knowledge is power, son. These people think they're untouchable because they control the local systems, the HOA, some cops, the neighborhood gossip network. But there's always a paper trail. Always connections to be found." He pulled up another document. "See this? Linda's husband's construction company got all the HOA maintenance contracts after she became president. No competitive bidding, inflated prices. Classic kickback scheme. Malik studied the wall of evidence, seeing how it all connected. Every string, every document told part of a larger story of corruption and abuse of power. The best part, Reginald said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice, she has no idea what's coming. People like Linda, they're so used to bullying others that they forget not everyone will back down. They forget that sometimes they pick on the wrong person. The wrong family, Malik corrected, echoing his father's words from the hospital. Reginald squeezed his shoulder gently. That's right. We're not just fighting back. We're going to expose everything. The discrimination, the fraud, the illegal security force. By the time I'm done, Linda won't just be removed from the HOA. She'll be facing criminal charges. Moving to another section of the wall, he pointed to a complex diagram. These are all the witnesses willing to speak up. Ms. Alvarez saw them attack you. The Thompsons have documentation of similar harassment. Even Mr. Chen, who Linda forced to remove his cultural decorations, is ready to testify. Malik felt a surge of hope. So, we're not alone. Never were, Reginald said. Linda just made everyone too scared to stand together. But that's changing now. He picked up his old FBI badge, running his thumb over the worn metal. You know, when I retired, I thought I was done with investigations, done with fighting the bad guys. But some battles choose you. I'm sorry you had to come out of retirement, Malik said softly. Reginald turned to him, eyes fierce with love and determination. Don't be. Protecting you, fighting for justice. That's not a burden. That's what fathers do. What this family does. Angela appeared in the doorway, carrying a tray with 3 cups of coffee. She surveyed the room, taking in the evidence of her husband's methodical mind at work. Thought you could use some fuel, she said, setting the tray down. She handed Malik his cup. More cream than coffee, just how he liked it. Reginald took his cup black, but before he could return to his work, Angela caught his hand. Her fingers intertwined with his, and she looked at the wall of evidence, the proof of everything their family had endured. And this, she whispered, her voice carrying all their pain, all their determination, for all of us. Ms. Alvarez's hands trembled slightly as she held her teacup, but her voice was steady and clear. She sat at the Carters' dining room table, which had been cleared of its usual items to make space for a digital recorder and notebook. I've watched Linda target families for years, she said, her accent growing stronger with emotion. But what she's doing to your family, it's worse than anything before. Reginald nodded, taking careful notes. Tell me about the community meeting last month. Linda thought I was on her side because… Ms. Alvarez's lips tightened. Well, because I'm one of the acceptable minorities in her view. She speaks freely around me. Angela, sitting beside her former student's grandmother, placed a comforting hand on her arm. Take your time, Elena. She said, and I quote, we need to maintain the right kind of neighborhood. Then she looked directly at your house and said, some people just don't understand our standards. Ms. Alvarez's face flushed with anger. She was talking about your family, using that coded language she loves so much. Reginald's pen moved steadily across the page. And the security contractors? Rick and Dale? They started appearing after your family moved in. Linda told everyone they were professional security consultants, but they're thugs. Ms. Alvarez's hands clenched around her cup. I saw them following Malik multiple times, watching your house. A soft knock at the front door made them all turn. Angela went to answer it, returning with Mrs. Thompson, a young mother from 3 doors down. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said nervously, but I saw Ms. Alvarez come in and, well, I have something to share too. More neighbors arrived over the next hour. Mr. Chen brought documentation of Linda's harassment over his Lunar New Year decorations. The Patels described how their children were suddenly uninvited from neighborhood events. Each story revealed a pattern of discrimination hidden behind HOA rules and community standards. Reginald recorded everything, his expression growing grimmer with each testimony. But it was Mrs. Thompson's revelation that made him sit up straighter. "My husband's an accountant," she said, pulling out a folder. He noticed something odd in the HOA newsletter's financial summary. The security budget increased by 300% this year, but there's no record of a formal contract or board approval. Reginald spread the financial documents across the table. "May I keep these?" "That's why I brought them," she replied. "We're tired of being scared of her." After the neighbors left, Reginald dove into the financial records. Malik brought him coffee, watching his father work with fascination. "Look at this," Reginald said, pointing to his laptop screen. "Linda created a shell company, Community Defense Solutions, LLC, registered to a P.O. box. The HOA pays this company for security services, but the money goes straight to a personal account." "Rick and Dale's payment?" Malik asked. "Exactly. She's stealing HOA funds to pay her private militia." Reginald pulled up another document. "And that's just the start. Every maintenance contract, every service provider, they all connect back to either Linda or her husband's businesses." Angela leaned over his shoulder, reading. "How much has she stolen? Conservative estimate? Over $200,000 in the past 3 years. Reginald's fingers flew over the keyboard. "She's gotten sloppy lately. Probably thought no one would look closely." He opened a new window, showing a series of emails. "She's been coordinating with Rick and Dale's militia group, using HOA letterhead to give them false authority. That's federal mail fraud on top of everything else." "What happens now?" Malik asked. Reginald began compiling files into a single document. "Now we show everyone who Linda really is." He worked through the evening, organizing the evidence into a clear narrative. Financial records, witness statements, photos, social media posts, everything that proved Linda's corruption and discrimination. "Done," he said finally, stretching his back. Angela and Malik gathered around as he addressed an email to multiple recipients: the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, the State Attorney General's office, 3 local news stations, and 2 newspaper reporters known for investigating community corruption. "Once we send this," he said, "there's no going back. Linda will know it came from us." "Good," Angela said firmly. "I want her to know exactly who brought her down." Malik nodded in agreement. "Do it, Dad." Reginald's finger hovered over the mouse for a moment. Then, with a single click, he sent the evidence file flying through cyberspace toward people who could use it to bring justice. "Now we wait," he said, closing the laptop. "By morning, Linda's carefully built empire of corruption will start crumbling." Angela squeezed his shoulder. "How long before they act on it?" "The media will move fastest. They love stories about corruption in suburban paradise." Reginald smiled grimly. "The federal authorities will take longer, but they'll be thorough. Linda's world is about to get very uncomfortable." Malik looked at the wall of evidence, still covered in photos and documents. "Should we take all this down now?" "Not yet," Reginald said. "We might need it for the investigators. Plus, I want Linda to see it when they come to interview us. I want her to understand that she never stood a chance once she decided to target this family." The digital clock on the wall clicked over to midnight. In inboxes across the city, Reginald's file waited to be discovered by the morning shift. The calm before the storm settled over the Carter household, but this time they weren't afraid. They had fought back with truth, with evidence, with the courage of their neighbors. And somewhere in the neighborhood, Linda Whitfield slept peacefully, unaware that her morning would bring the beginning of her downfall. The community center buzzed with tension as neighbors filed in for the emergency HOA meeting. Linda Whitfield stood at the podium, shuffling papers with practiced precision, her pearl necklace catching the fluorescent light. Her smile held the satisfaction of a predator about to pounce. Reginald and Malek Carter arrived last, positioning themselves near the back door. Malik's hands were sweaty, but his father's calm presence steadied him. They watched Rick and Dale prowl the edges of the room in their fake tactical vests, trying to look intimidating. "I call this emergency meeting to order," Linda announced, tapping her gavel with theatrical authority. "We have serious matters to discuss regarding certain disruptive elements in our community." Her eyes fixed on the Carters, but Reginald met her gaze evenly. Malik noticed his father check his watch and give a slight nod. "As president of this association," Linda continued, "it is my duty to maintain our standards. I have documented evidence of multiple violations, threatening behavior, and actions detrimental to property values." She pulled out a thick folder, making a show of opening it. "The Carter family has repeatedly—" The double doors at the front of the room burst open. 4 men and women in dark suits strode in, their FBI badges gleaming. The lead agent, a tall woman with steel-gray hair, spoke with commanding authority. "Linda Whitfield?" She held up her credentials. "I'm Special Agent Monica Torres, FBI Public Corruption Unit. This meeting is now suspended." The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Linda's face drained of color, but she tried to maintain control. "This is a private meeting." "You have no authority. We have federal warrants," Agent Torres cut her off, nodding to her colleagues. 2 agents moved toward Rick and Dale, who had instinctively backed toward the emergency exit. "Rick Thompson and Dale Matthews," one agent announced. "You're under arrest for impersonating law enforcement officers, conspiracy to commit mail fraud, and violation of civil rights under color of law." Rick tried to bolt, but another agent was already blocking the exit. Dale raised his hands immediately, his tough guy facade crumbling. The sound of handcuffs clicking echoed in the suddenly silent room. "This is ridiculous!" Linda's voice rose to a shriek. "These are legitimate security contractors." Agent Torres approached the podium, holding up a document. "We have evidence that you created a fraudulent security company to funnel HOA funds to known members of a militia group, Mrs. Whitfield. We've been building this case for weeks." Camera flashes started popping from the doorway as news crews pushed into the room. Malik recognized reporters from all 3 local stations, their microphones raised like spears. But, Linda sputtered, looking desperately around the room. Her eyes landed on the Carters, and understanding dawned. You did this!" Reginald's voice carried clearly across the chaos. "You targeted my son, Linda. Did you really think I wouldn't fight back?" More flashes as photographers captured Linda's expression of pure rage. "Mr. Stir." Chen stood up from his seat. "Is this about the missing maintenance funds, too?" Agent Torres nodded. "We're investigating approximately $200,000 in misappropriated HOA fees. Anyone who has information about financial irregularities should stay to speak with our agents." Ms. Alvarez moved to stand beside the Carters, her head held high. "I have documentation of discriminatory practices going back 3 years. So do we, Mrs. Thompson added, her husband nodding beside her. Linda tried to gather her papers, but an agent stepped forward. "Those documents need to stay here, Mrs. Whitfield. They're potential evidence." The news crews were having a field day, capturing every moment as Rick and Dale were led out in handcuffs. Their tactical vests, symbols of their fake authority, looked pathetic now under the bright camera lights. "Linda Whitfield," Agent Torres said formally, "you have the right to remain silent." "You can't do this!" Linda shrieked. "I know people. I'll have all your jobs." "Please continue threatening federal officers," Torres said calmly. "It's being recorded." Malik watched in amazement as Linda was handcuffed, her perfectly manicured hands secured behind her designer blazer. The woman who had terrorized his family, who had made him feel unwelcome in his own neighborhood, was being led away like a common criminal. Neighbors began approaching the Carters, some apologizing for not speaking up sooner, others expressing relief that Linda's reign was finally over. Mr. Whitman, who had always sided with Linda, slipped quietly out the back door. "Dad," Malik whispered, "did you know exactly when they'd come?" Reginald smiled slightly. "Agent Torres is an old colleague. Once we provided the evidence, she made sure we'd be here to see justice served." A reporter approached them, microphone extended. "Mr. Carter, can you tell us about the harassment your family endured?" Before Reginald could answer, Ms. Alvarez stepped forward. "I'll tell you everything. We all will. It's time everyone knew what really happened in our perfect little neighborhood." More neighbors gathered around, each ready to share their stories. The community center hummed with energy, but it was different now. The fear was gone, replaced by a sense of relief and solidarity. Through the windows, they could see Linda being escorted to an FBI vehicle, her carefully crafted image of authority shattered. Rick and Dale were already in the back of another car, their borrowed power stripped away. Cameras continued to flash, documenting every moment of Linda Whitfield's downfall, while Agent Torres coordinated her team's collection of evidence. The HOA meeting that was supposed to be Linda's triumph had become her final act of power, and the community's first step toward healing. Linda Whitfield's perfectly coiffed hair was starting to fray as Agent Torres spread documents across the podium. The community center's harsh lighting seemed to highlight every bead of sweat on Linda's forehead. "We have bank statements showing systematic theft of HOA funds," Torres announced, her voice carrying across the now silent room. "Multiple shell companies, fake invoices, and direct payments to unauthorized security personnel. Those are legitimate business expenses," Linda protested, but her voice wavered. Agent Torres held up a thick manila folder. "We also have evidence of coordinated harassment, civil rights violations, and conspiracy to commit hate crimes. Your emails and text messages make for interesting reading, Mrs. Whitfield." The color drained from Linda's face as Torres began reading from a printed transcript. "Get those people out of our neighborhood whatever it takes," Torres quoted. "I don't care what you have to do. Just make them leave." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Thompson stood up, pointing an accusing finger. "You told me the Carters were under investigation for drug dealing. That was a lie, wasn't it?" "She told me they were running a criminal enterprise," Mr. Chen added, his face reddening with anger. "That's why she said we needed the special security patrols." Linda's eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal. "You don't understand. Property values were at stake. I was protecting our community." "By stealing from us?" Ms. Alvarez interrupted, waving a stack of financial documents. "I've been reviewing the maintenance records. We paid for repairs that were never done." "The pool renovation funds?" someone shouted from the back. "The security cameras that were never installed?" called another voice. Linda's perfectly manufactured facade began to crack. "Everything I did was for this neighborhood. These people," she jabbed a finger toward the Carters, "they don't belong here. They're not our kind." The room erupted in boos and shouts of disgust. Malik watched as neighbors he'd barely spoken to stood up, voicing their outrage. "I heard what you said about my family, too," Mrs. Patel called out. "About how we lowered the tone of the street." "And my rainbow flag," added Mr. Rodriguez. "The one that mysteriously vanished after you complained?" Linda's expression twisted with desperate rage. "Rick and Dale were supposed to handle this. They promised me." "That they'd terrorize a 16-year-old boy?" Agent Torres interjected coldly. Your security contractors have extensive ties to known hate groups. Did you think we wouldn't discover that? They were recommended, Linda shrieked. The Heritage Association said they'd help maintain neighborhood standards. The Heritage Association? Torres raised an eyebrow. Thank you for that confession. We've been investigating their activities for months. More neighbors were standing now, years of pent-up grievances pouring out. Stories of intimidation, selective enforcement, mysterious fines, and vandalized property filled the air. Linda's network of control was unraveling thread by thread. The board knew nothing about this, announced Mrs. Chen, the HOA treasurer. She forged our signatures on documents. We trusted her. Linda's perfectly manicured hands gripped the podium. You're all ungrateful. This was an exclusive community before... Before what? Reginald's calm voice cut through the chaos like a blade. He stepped forward, Malik beside him, both standing tall. Before families like mine moved in? Before you couldn't control who your neighbors were? The room fell silent, all eyes on the confrontation. Linda's mask finally shattered completely, her face contorted with hatred. You ruined everything, she spat. This was a perfect neighborhood until you people... Mrs. Whitfield, Agent Torres interrupted sharply, I suggest you stop talking. You're only making things worse for yourself. But Linda was beyond reason now, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. I had every right. I was protecting our values. The board gave me authority. The board gave you authority to manage a homeowners association, Reginald said quietly, his voice carrying across the stunned room. Not to run a criminal enterprise, not to terrorize families, and certainly not to target my son. Malik stood straighter beside his father, no longer afraid of the woman who had tried to drive his family out. Linda's power over him evaporated as he watched her unravel. You don't understand, Linda tried one last time, her voice taking on a pleading tone. Everything I did was necessary. The neighborhood needed me to... To what? Agent Torres asked. To embezzle their money? To hire thugs? To violate their civil rights? Two FBI agents moved to flank Linda as she began to back away from the podium. The room had turned completely against her, faces that once smiled at her commands now glaring with open hostility. This is all your fault, she screamed at the Carters. I'll sue you. I'll have you investigated. I know people in the police department. No, Linda, Reginald said with quiet finality. You don't run this neighborhood anymore. The simple truth of those words seemed to break something in Linda. She lunged forward, manicured nails extended like claws, but the FBI agents smoothly caught her arms. The handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists as she thrashed and screamed. How dare you! Don't you know who I am? I'm the president. I'm in charge here. The neighbors, people who had lived under her thumb for years, began to applaud as the agents led her toward the door. Some even cheered. Femme fils. Alvarez threw her copy of the HOA rulebook, Linda's favorite weapon, into the trash with theatrical flair. This isn't over, Linda shrieked as she was escorted out. You'll see. You'll all see what happens without me. Her threats dissolved into incoherent raging as the doors swung shut behind her, cutting off the sound of her voice. In the sudden quiet, neighbors looked at each other as if seeing their community clearly for the first time. A week had passed since Linda Whitfield's dramatic arrest. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Maple Grove's tree-lined streets as Malik Carter walked home from basketball practice. His bruises had faded, but the memories remained sharp and clear. This time was different, though. As he passed Mr. Chen's house, the elderly man looked up from watering his flowers and smiled warmly. Great game last night, Malik. That three-pointer in the fourth quarter was something else. Malik grinned, remembering how half the neighborhood had shown up to cheer him on. "Thanks, Mr. Chen. Those roses are looking amazing." A few houses down, Mrs. Thompson waved from her driveway where she was unloading groceries. "Malik, honey, tell your mama I've got that recipe she asked for." The street that had once felt like hostile territory now hummed with friendly energy. Kids played freely on their front lawns, parents chatted across fences, and the fake security truck was nowhere to be seen. Even Mr. Whitman, who'd once muttered darkly about troublemakers, now gave Malik a respectful nod. Ms. Alvarez sat on her porch swing, grading papers. She looked up as Malik passed, her face brightening. "There's our neighborhood hero. Come here a minute, mijo." Malik crossed her perfectly manicured lawn, the one Linda had constantly cited for imaginary violations. "How are you, Ms. Alvarez?" "Much better now that we've cleaned house," she said, patting the swing beside her. "The interim HOA board met yesterday. We're rewriting all the bylaws to prevent another Linda from ever taking power." "That's great," Malik said, settling next to his former teacher. "Dad's been helping with that, right?" "Your father is a godsend," Ms. Alvarez nodded. "He's helping us set up proper oversight and transparency rules. But you know what makes me happiest?" She gestured at the street. "Look at everyone. Really look." Malik observed the scene before him. The Rodriguez kids were playing basketball with the Patel twins. Mrs. Thompson was now sharing her groceries with Mr. Chen, laughing about something. Two new families were moving in down the block, and neighbors were already bringing welcome baskets. "This is what community looks like," Ms. Alvarez said softly. "Not Linda's version of perfect lawns and perfect people, but real neighbors looking out for each other." "It feels different," Malik admitted. "Like we can breathe better." "That's because we finally stood up to the bully." Ms. Alvarez squeezed his shoulder. "And you, young man, showed us how." Malik felt his cheeks warm at the praise. "I was scared, though, when those guys cornered me." "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," Ms. Alvarez said firmly. "It means you face the fear anyway. That's what you and your family did." Further down the street, Malik could see his parents sitting on their own porch. His mother was still in her nursing scrubs, looking tired but content as she leaned against his father. They watched the neighborhood with quiet satisfaction, like guardians who'd helped restore peace to their domain. "I should head home," Malik said, standing up. "Mom's probably got dinner ready." "Go on then," Ms. Alvarez smiled. "But remember, you're always welcome here." As Malik walked the final stretch home, he remembered how different this same path had felt just a week ago. The fear, the anger, the feeling of being an outsider in his own neighborhood. Now each step felt like a victory. His parents straightened up as he approached, their faces glowing with pride. Angela held out her arms for a hug, and Malik gladly accepted it, no longer worried about looking uncool in front of the neighbors. "Good practice?" Reginald asked, his deep voice carrying the same calm strength that had faced down Linda's threats. "Yeah," Malik settled into the porch chair between them. "Coach says I might make team captain next season." "Of course you will," Angela squeezed his hand. "You're a natural leader, baby. Just like your father." Malik looked out at their street, now peaceful in the gathering dusk. Porch lights were starting to come on, creating a warm, welcoming glow. The basketball hoop that Linda had tried to have removed stood proudly in their driveway, a symbol of defiance turned into victory. "You know what I realized?" Malik said thoughtfully. "We didn't just survive what they threw at us. We changed everything. The whole neighborhood is different now." "That's because you showed people they had a choice," Reginald replied. "Sometimes folks go along with wrong things because they're scared to stand up. But when someone takes that first step, others find their courage too," Angela finished. "Like Ms. Alvarez, and then the Chens, even old Mr. Whitman came around. The evening air was sweet with the scent of blooming jasmine, from the vine Linda had once ordered them to remove. Now it climbed freely up their porch trellis, its white flowers glowing in the twilight. A group of kids rode past on bikes, calling out cheerful greetings. The sound of their laughter echoed down the street, no longer hushed by Linda's arbitrary rules about noise pollution. Somewhere nearby, music played softly from a backyard gathering. "This feels like home now," Malik said quietly. "Really feels like it." Angela wrapped an arm around his shoulders, and Reginald's strong hand clasped his knee. They sat together as the stars began to appear. A family that had faced darkness and emerged stronger. The porch light cast a gentle glow around them, and for the first time since moving to Maple Grove, they felt completely at peace. The neighborhood had transformed from a battlefield into a sanctuary. Not because they'd run from the fight, but because they'd stayed and won it together. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.